Amara had always dreamed of becoming a mother. When she married Obi, she was full of hope and excitement, believing that God would bless them with a child quickly. But as the months turned into years, her hope began to fade. Every month, she waited anxiously, hoping for a sign of pregnancy, only to be disappointed again and again. She visited doctors, took herbal treatments, and even changed her diet, but nothing worked. Obi remained patient, assuring her that God's time was the best, but Amara was struggling to hold on. Each passing year felt like a heavy weight pressing on her heart, making her feel less of a woman. The pressure from society only made things worse. Her mother-in-law never missed an opportunity to remind her that she had failed as a wife. A woman's true glory is in her children, she would say, shaking her head in disappointment. Family gatherings became a nightmare for Amara, as people constantly asked her when she would have a baby. Even her friends, who once stood by her, started avoiding her, as if her childlessness was a disease that could spread. She often cried herself to sleep, feeling abandoned and helpless. Though she continued to pray, she began to wonder if God was even listening. One day, her closest friend, Susan, visited her. She could see the pain in Amara's eyes and knew she had to say something. "Amara, you have waited for 5 years. How long will you keep hoping? Maybe God wants you to find another way," she said gently. Amara frowned. "What do you mean?" she asked. Susan leaned closer and whispered, "There's a man who helps women get pregnant. He has helped many others. Maybe he can help you too." Amara's heart pounded. She had always been told that children were gifts from God, but had God not abandoned her? Maybe this was her only chance to become a mother. Amara could not stop thinking about Susan's words. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind filled with doubt and confusion. Was it wrong to seek help outside God? What if this was the only way to save my marriage? Though her husband never pressured her, she knew that society would eventually push him to take another wife. The thought of losing him made her shiver. She turned to look at him, sleeping peacefully beside her. He was a good man, a patient husband, but how long would he wait? Desperation clawed at her heart, making her consider things she never would have before. The next morning, Amara called Susan. "Tell me more about this man," she said hesitantly. Susan was excited. "His name is Okiki. He lives in a small town. Many women have gone to him, and they all came back pregnant. He has a special gift," she explained. Amara felt uneasy. It sounded mysterious, but the promise of a child was too tempting to ignore. She decided to go with Susan the next weekend. If there was even a small chance that this man could help her, she had to take it. The day came. Amara felt nervous. She had never done anything like this before. As they drove through the rough roads, doubts filled her mind. What if Obi found out? What if it didn't work? She shook the thoughts away. She had already waited too long. It was time to take control of her life. When they finally reached the shrine, she felt a chill run down her spine. The place was silent, except for the rustling of leaves. A middle-aged woman led them inside, and there, sitting on a wooden stool, was the native doctor. His eyes, sharp and knowing, rested on Amara. "You seek a child," he said, his voice deep and commanding. Amara gasped. He knew why she was here even before she spoke. Amara stood frozen, staring at him. His presence was intimidating, and a part of her wanted to run away. But when she thought of all the pain she had endured over the years, she forced herself to stay. "Yes," she whispered. "I want a child." He nodded slowly, as if he had expected her answer. He gestured for her to sit on a small mat in front of him. "The spirits have been waiting for you," he said, his voice sending chills down her spine. Amara's heart pounded in her chest. What did he mean? Had she already been chosen for this? Susan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Relax, Amara. He knows what to do. she said softly. Amara swallowed hard, nodding. The native doctor closed his eyes and began chanting in a language she did not understand. The room felt heavy, as though the air had thickened. After a while, he opened his eyes and looked at her again. You must bring a white hen, a goat, and a piece of your husband's clothing, he instructed. Amara hesitated. Why do you need Obi's clothing? She asked. To bind the child to his lineage, he replied. Without it, the spirits will not grant your request. Amara felt uneasy, but she nodded. She had already come this far. She couldn't turn back now. As they left the shrine, she kept her thoughts to herself. How would she take Obi's clothing without him noticing? And what exactly did the native doctor mean by binding the child? Susan noticed her silence and nudged her playfully. Don't overthink it, my friend. Soon, you'll be a mother, she said with a bright smile. Amara forced a smile back, but deep inside, she felt a growing sense of fear. Had she made the right decision, or was she about to enter a world she could never escape from? For the next few days, Amara struggled with her decision. She wanted a child more than anything, but she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her heart. The things the native doctor asked for seemed simple: a white hen, a goat, and a piece of Obi's clothing. But deep inside, she felt that this was more. She couldn't tell Obi the truth, so she had to be careful. Late one night, when he was asleep, she quietly opened his wardrobe and took one of his shirts. As she held it in her hands, her heart pounded. Was she betraying her husband? She quickly folded the shirt and hid it under her clothes, pushing the guilt aside. The next morning, she went to the market to buy the white hen and the goat. As she walked through the busy stalls, she kept looking around, afraid that someone she knew would see her. She felt like a thief, sneaking around to do something she wasn't supposed to. When she finally had everything the native doctor asked for, she sent a message to Susan, who arranged for them to return to the shrine the next evening. Amara felt her stomach tighten as the time drew closer. Was this really the right thing to do? She had prayed for a child for years. But what if this path led to something worse? When they arrived at the shrine, the native doctor was waiting for them. He took the items without a word and led them to a small, dark room filled with the smell of burning herbs. The spirits are pleased, he said, his voice calm but firm. He tied Obi's shirt around a carved wooden figure, then poured some liquid over it. Amara watched in silence as he muttered strange words, his hands moving over the statue in a slow, deliberate motion. Finally, he turned to her and said, "You will conceive soon. But remember, what has been given must not be taken for granted." Amara swallowed hard. She had what she wanted, but why did it feel like she had just stepped into something she couldn't control? 2 months later, Amara sat on the edge of her bed, holding a pregnancy test in her shaking hands. Her heart raced as she stared at the tiny window on the stick, waiting for the result. She had been feeling different lately, tired, nauseous, and unusually hungry. When the second line appeared, her breath caught in her throat. She was pregnant. Tears filled her eyes as she covered her mouth, unable to believe it. After 5 long years, her prayers had finally been answered. She rushed out of the room, calling Obi's name with excitement. Obi looked up in surprise as she ran into the living room. "What is it, Amara?" he asked, concerned. She held up the test, her hands trembling. "Baby, I'm pregnant." His eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, he just stared at her. Then his face broke into a wide smile, and he pulled her into his arms. "Are you sure?" he whispered. Amara nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I can't believe it, but it's true." Obi lifted her off the ground, spinning her around in pure joy. "God has finally answered us," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. Amara smiled, but deep inside, she knew the truth. This was not God's doing. News of Amara's pregnancy spread quickly, and soon, family and friends came to congratulate her. Her mother-in-law, who once treated her coldly, now beamed with pride. "You have made our family complete," she said, holding Amara's hands. Amara should have felt happy, but something in her heart wouldn't let her rest. She had done something she couldn't take back. She tried to push the thoughts away, telling herself that all that mattered was that she was finally carrying a child. But late at night, when everything was quiet, guilt wrapped itself around her like a heavy blanket. As Amara's belly grew, so did her unease. The joy she had once felt began to fade, replaced by a deep, unsettling fear. Every time she looked at her reflection in the mirror, she felt like something was watching her. At night, she had strange dreams, dark figures whispering her name, an invisible presence standing in the corner of her room. Sometimes she woke up drenched in sweat, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She wanted to pray, but every time she opened her mouth, she felt a strange heaviness in her chest. Obi noticed the change in her. "Amara, are you okay?" he asked one evening as they sat together on the couch. She forced a smile and nodded. "Yes, I'm just tired," she lied. She couldn't tell him the truth, not after everything. How could she explain that she had gone to a shrine for this pregnancy? What if he never forgave her? What if something terrible happened because of what she had done? She kept her fears to herself, pretending that everything was fine. But deep inside, she felt like a prisoner in her own body, trapped by the choices she had made. One afternoon, Susan came to visit. "Amara, why do you look so worried?" she asked, frowning. Amara hesitated, then whispered, "Susan, do you think I did the right thing?" Susan rolled her eyes. "Of course you did. Look at you, glowing with pregnancy. Soon, you'll be holding your baby in your arms. Forget about everything else." Amara nodded slowly, but her heart was heavy. She wanted to believe Susan, to convince herself that this was just fear playing tricks on her. As Amara's pregnancy progressed, her nightmares became worse. She would wake up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, feeling like someone was in the room with her. Sometimes she heard whispers, soft, eerie voices calling her name. She tried to ignore them, convincing herself that it was just her imagination, but the fear wouldn't leave. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the shrine, Okiki's piercing eyes, and the strange ritual he performed. She wished she could erase that day from her memory, but it haunted her like a shadow she couldn't escape. Obi remained excited about the pregnancy, unaware of Amara's secret torment. He would place his hands on her belly every night, talking to their unborn child. "Our little miracle, I can't wait to meet you," he would say, his eyes shining with love. Amara forced a smile, pretending to share his happiness. But deep inside, she wondered, was this truly a miracle, or was it something else entirely? Each time Obi prayed for their baby, guilt twisted inside her. She wanted to tell him the truth, but the words refused to leave her lips. 9 months came so quickly, Amara fell into labor on a stormy night. The rain poured heavily outside, and thunder rumbled in the distance. The labor was long and painful, unlike anything she had ever imagined. The midwives struggled to help her, their faces tense with worry. "Push," they urged. She screamed in agony, feeling like her body was being torn apart. Something about this birth felt unnatural, as if something unseen was present in the room. The wind howled outside, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the baby's cry filled the air. Amara collapsed in exhaustion, her body drenched in sweat. One of the midwives picked up the newborn and wrapped it in a cloth. "It's a boy," she said softly, placing him in Amara's arms. Amara stared down at her child, her heart pounding. He was beautiful, his dark eyes wide and alert, his tiny fingers curling around hers. But the moment she touched him, an overwhelming fear washed over her. She couldn't explain it. Obi rushed into the room, his face lighting up with joy. "Amara, you did it!" he exclaimed, taking the baby in his arms. Tears filled his eyes as he held his son for the first time. "Our miracle," he whispered. Amara forced a smile, but her hands trembled. She should have felt relief, happiness, even love. But instead, all she felt was a deep, unsettling dread. At first, everything seemed normal. The baby, whom Obi named Junior, ate well, slept peacefully, and rarely cried. He was a strong and healthy child, growing quickly, much faster than normal. At 3 months, he could already sit up. By 6 months, he was crawling at an unusual speed. Obi was proud, telling everyone that their son was special. "God has truly blessed us," he would say with joy. But Amara couldn't ignore the fear creeping into her heart. This wasn't normal. Something about Junior was different, and she was the only one who could see it. At night, when everyone was asleep, Amara would hear strange sounds coming from the baby's cradle. Soft murmurs, like whispers in the dark. Sometimes, she would wake up and find him staring at her, his wide eyes unblinking, as if he was watching her every move. She tried to tell herself she was imagining things, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. One night, she woke up to the sound of laughter. It wasn't a baby's laughter. It was deep, almost like that of an adult. Her body went cold as she turned to look at the cradle. Junior was sitting up, staring straight at her, a strange smile on his tiny lips. She gasped and shook Obi awake. "Obi! Something is wrong with Junior," she cried. Obi sat up, rubbing his eyes. "What are you talking about?" He looked at the baby, who now appeared to be sleeping peacefully. Amara's mouth went dry. Had she imagined it? Was her mind playing tricks on her? Obi sighed and pulled her close. "You're just tired, Amara. Motherhood is stressful, but everything is fine," he assured her. Amara nodded slowly, but deep in her heart, she knew what she saw. Everything was far from fine, and she was the only one who could feel it. As the months passed, Amara's fear only grew stronger. Junior was unlike any other child she had seen. At just 1 year old, he was already walking and playing around, his small feet moving swiftly across the house, as if he had been walking for years. He rarely cried, and when he did, it was not the cry of a normal baby. It was deep, almost unnatural, sending shivers down Amara's spine. He never played with other children, and when he looked at people, his gaze was intense, almost as if he could see straight into their souls. One afternoon, Amara was in the kitchen preparing food when she heard a loud crash from the living room. She rushed in and saw that the large wooden table had been flipped over, its contents scattered on the floor. Her heart pounded as she turned to look at Junior, who was standing beside the table, his small hands clenched into fists. "Junior, did you do this?" she asked, her voice shaking. The boy simply looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. He did not speak, but a small, knowing smile formed on his lips. Amara felt her blood turn cold. How could a child so small have such strength? That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She could no longer ignore the truth. Something was terribly wrong with her son. She thought back to Okiki's words. What has been given must not be taken for granted. What had she done? Had she invited something evil into her home? She wanted to pray, but every time she tried, her voice felt stuck in her throat. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks as she realized the terrible mistake she had made. She had been desperate for a child, but now she had made a big mistake. One evening, a woman came to visit Amara. She was known as Madame Vicky. She was a wise woman who had seen many things in her lifetime. She had heard about Junior and came to see him for herself. The moment she stepped into the house, she froze, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the child playing in the corner. She shook her head and turned to Amara. "My daughter, "What have you done?" she whispered. Amara's heart pounded. "What do you mean, Ma?" she asked, pretending not to understand. The woman sighed and took Amara's hands in hers. "This child, he is not ordinary. His spirit is not from this world," she said firmly. Amara's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to deny it, but deep inside, she knew it was true. "What do I do?" she asked in a desperate whisper. Madame Vicky glanced at Junior again and then leaned closer. "You must seek deliverance. Take him to a man of God before it is too late." Amara felt a lump in her throat. She knew she needed help, but how could she explain this to Obi? He adored Junior and would never believe such things. "Please, Ma, don't tell anyone," she begged. The woman nodded. "I will not speak of this, but you must act fast. Evil does not wait." As she left, Amara felt like a heavy stone had been placed on her chest. The truth was staring her in the face. She had opened a door that should have remained closed. Now, she had to find a way to undo the damage before it was too late. Amara became more determined to find a solution, but she had to be careful. Obi saw nothing wrong with Junior and believed he was simply a strong and intelligent child. If she told him the truth, he would think she was losing her mind. So, she kept her worries to herself. Every night, she stayed awake, listening for the strange whispers, the eerie laughter, or the mysterious sounds that seemed to fill the house when no one else was around. One night, she decided to test something. After Obi had gone to bed, she took her Bible and stood near Junior's crib. Her hands trembled as she opened to the book of Psalms and began to read out loud. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." As the words left her lips, Junior, who had been sleeping, suddenly opened his eyes. His small body stiffened, and his breathing became heavy. Then, without warning, he let out a loud scream. Amara jumped back, fear gripping her heart. The child thrashed in his crib, his eyes wide with rage. Obi rushed into the room. "What's going on?" he demanded, picking up Junior, who immediately calmed down. Amara stood frozen, unable to speak. Obi looked at her with concern. "Why are you holding a Bible over him like that?" he asked. Amara swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. "I was just praying," she whispered. Obi sighed. "Amara, you're stressing yourself too much. He's just a baby." He shook his head and took Junior back to their bedroom. Amara stood there, trembling. She knew the truth now. Whatever was inside her child could not stand the power of God. But how could she fight something she didn't even understand? Amara knew she couldn't delay any longer. She had to do something before it was too late. The following morning, while Obi was at work, she took Junior to a church on the outskirts of the city. It was a place she had only heard about, a church where people went when they needed deliverance from afflictions. Her heart pounded as she approached the doors. She had never been here before, but she knew this was the only hope she had left. At the altar stood a tall man in a white robe, Pastor Emmanuel. He was known for his ability to discern spirits and cast out evil. As Amara stepped forward, he turned and looked at her, his sharp eyes scanning her face before settling on the child in her arms. "You have come with a burden, daughter," he said softly. Amara nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Pastor, my child, something is wrong with him," she whispered. The pastor stretched out his hands, motioning for her to come closer. Amara hesitated, then gently placed Junior in his arms. As soon as the pastor touched the child, his eyes widened in shock. "This is no ordinary child," he murmured. He then looked straight at Amara. "Tell me the truth, woman. What did you do before you conceived this boy?" Amara's legs felt weak. She looked down, shame filling her heart. "I went to a shrine," she admitted in a broken voice. The pastor sighed deeply. "Then you must prepare yourself, because this battle will not be easy." Pastor Emmanuel placed Junior on a mat and instructed Amara to kneel beside him. "We must pray," he said firmly. Whatever spirit is inside this child must be cast out. Amara swallowed hard and nodded. She had spent years begging for a child, but now she was pleading with God to free her from the consequences of her impatience. As the pastor began to pray, the atmosphere in the room changed. Amara clenched her hands together, whispering her own desperate prayers. Suddenly, Junior let out a loud, piercing scream. His small body began to shake violently, his eyes rolling back in his head. Pastor Emmanuel did not stop praying. His voice grew louder, more commanding. In the name of Jesus, whatever spirit is in this child, I command you to leave. Junior's scream turned into a deep, guttural growl. Amara covered her ears, tears streaming down her face. I should have never done it, she sobbed. God, please forgive me. The pastor continued, his hands raised high. The power of God is greater than any darkness. This child belongs to the Lord, not to the shrine. Suddenly, Junior's body went limp. Slowly, his eyes fluttered open. He looked around the room, his gaze softer, more innocent than before. For the first time since his birth, Amara saw something she had never seen in him: peace. She covered her mouth in disbelief. Pastor, is it over? She whispered. Pastor Emmanuel wiped sweat from his brow and nodded. By God's grace, the spirit has left him. Relief flooded through Amara, and she broke into uncontrollable sobs. She had risked everything, but God had shown her mercy. Thank you, Jesus, she whispered over and over. Pastor Emmanuel knelt beside her. You have been given a second chance, Amara, but you must never return to the path that led you here, he warned. There is always a price to pay when we go against God's will. Amara nodded, wiping her tears. She knew she had been given another chance, and she would not waste it. As she gathered Junior in her arms, she felt lighter, freer than she had in years. She had learned a painful lesson. Impatience had nearly destroyed her, but in the end, God's mercy had saved her. Now, she had to return home and face the next challenge, telling Obi the truth. Would he ever forgive her? She did not know. The moment she stepped into the house, she saw Obi sitting in the living room, looking worried. Amara, where have you been? I came home early and didn't find you or Junior. Amara swallowed hard, her hands trembling. Obi, there's something I need to tell you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as she took a deep breath. I haven't been honest with you about how I got pregnant, she admitted. Obi frowned. What do you mean? He asked. Tears filled Amara's eyes as she finally confessed everything. How she had gone to Okiki, the rituals she had performed, and the terrible things she had experienced since then. She told him about Junior's strange behavior, her nightmares, and finally, the deliverance at the church. Obi's face turned pale as he listened. His hands clenched into fists, and his breathing grew heavy. Amara, you mean to tell me that all this time, our son was not truly ours? His voice was filled with hurt. Amara broke into sobs. I was desperate, Obi. I couldn't bear the shame any more. I thought I was doing what was best for us, she cried. Obi stood up, pacing back and forth. His heart was breaking. He had loved and cherished his son, believing he was a gift from God. Now he was faced with the painful truth that the child had come through another source. Obi couldn't speak for a long time. He ran his fingers through his hair, trying to process everything. He had always trusted Amara, believing that their love was strong enough to endure any hardship. But now he felt betrayed. How could you do this, Amara? He finally asked, his voice shaking. We prayed for a child together. We waited together. But you went behind my back and did this. Amara flinched at the pain in his voice. She had expected him to be angry, but hearing it broke her heart even more. I know I was wrong, Obi. I know I should have waited on God. But I was weak. The insults, the shame, It was too much, she tried to explain, wiping her tears. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was helping our family. Obi shook his head, his eyes filled with disappointment. Helping our family, he repeated bitterly. He turned away from her, unable to look at her. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Amara felt her heart sink. She had feared this moment, but it still hurt deeply. Please, Obi. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but Junior is free now. The pastor said the spirit is gone. He is truly ours now, she pleaded. Obi sighed heavily, his emotions in turmoil. I need time, he finally said. I can't just forget this overnight. Amara nodded, understanding that healing would take time. Days turned into weeks, and things remained tense between Amara and Obi. He barely spoke to her. Amara tried everything to regain his trust. She cooked his favorite meals and spoke softly. But Obi was still struggling with the truth. He couldn't understand why she had made such a great decision without telling him. Every time he looked at Junior, he felt a mix of love and pain. The child was innocent, but the circumstances of his birth made everything complicated. As time passed, Obi's heart slowly began to heal. He still felt pain, but he saw the effort Amara was making. Obi realized that God had redeemed his son. One evening, as he watched Amara play with Junior in the yard, something inside him softened. He walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. I forgive you, Amara, he said simply. Tears welled up in Amara's eyes as she turned to face him. Thank you, my love, she whispered, overwhelmed with gratitude. She knew she didn't deserve his forgiveness, but God had worked in his heart. Days turned into months, and their home was filled with laughter once again. The past was painful, but it no longer controlled them. Amara learned to trust God's timing, knowing that his plans were always better than her own. She looked at Junior, who was now a happy and a playful child, and she knew that despite everything, God had turned her mistake into a testimony. And soon, without any effort, God blessed them with another child, a daughter, born in his perfect time. This time, there was no fear, no regret, only pure joy. As Amara held her newborn daughter in her arms, she smiled, feeling peace like never before. She had learned the hard way that patience was not just about waiting, it was about trusting. And in the end, God had given her more than she had ever hoped for. The price of impatience had been high, but the reward of waiting on God was even greater. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment.